Well, this is a good group. I just want to say good morning. My name is Stacey Heisler, and I'm a counselor here at Grand Rapids Community College in the Counseling and Career Development unit, which is over on the third floor in the Student Center. And I'm in my 14th year of counseling college students here at GRCC. And I've sat in your seats many times before, where you are now, but never up here behind this table. I spend most of my day listening to your stories. Now you get to hear a few of mine. So this is a real privilege, and I confess it's a little bit of a stretch. Thanks to all of you for being here. I really want to thank the English department for the opportunity to contribute to this conference today. Who cares, why bother? Real writing for real people. I am a real person, so I thought I could apply, and here I am. So writing has been a very, very important aspect of my life, and it's evident from all the letters, the postcards, diaries, and the journals that I've written and kept since I was a very young child growing up in the Midwest. So I titled my presentation today, Letters to My Former Self, the Journal as Therapy. It Works for Me. So I thought I'd take some time to share a bit of my college journey with you this morning and encourage you to take up your journals and write your own life stories as well. And consider the value of journaling even as a form of therapy, how it can lead to self-understanding and even self-compassion, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But journaling is a way to reflect and consider this important time in your lives as your world expands around you through your education. And before I wrap up, I'm also going to share one resource of many. There are so many out there for journaling that you might find helpful for yourself, and also challenge you to consider a serious issue that historians are trying to grapple with at this time for all of us here in the present as well as in the future. So let me begin. So writing has always been an important part of my life, and one of my earliest memories involves learning how to write. I clearly recall the practice of writing the alphabet using crayons and chunky pencils on big sheets of lined paper, practicing over and over again. And one day a visitor showed up at our house, and I don't remember his name. I think he knew my father through their work together at the hospital. But he sat down on the floor with me in that living room at my parents' house, and he wrote out my name. And I remember Stacey, in very big letters. And it was that first time I really connected that those combined letters were a name, and they represented me. And what I now know is that that was the first conscious recognition that I had a self, a sense of self. And that I was separate, and I was unique, and it came from this visitor who's probably in his 70s now, maybe 80s if he's still around. I don't know his name, but he did take an interest in me, and little kids love that kind of attention, and I was no exception. And it was the first of many discoveries that this act of writing was indeed very, very important. So I wrote a lot of letters growing up, and I made books, and in 5th grade I wrote a play, and somehow I convinced all of my classmates to learn their lines during recess, and it was a spooky Halloween theme, something about a haunted house if I remember right. And I have a diary that pretty much covers all those years in grade school, the first of a dozen of diaries and journals over the years. And even now, I still carry with me a black moleskin journal in my bag. I recommend these. These are great. I think I got this one at Schuler's. You can find them just about anywhere. And I carry it to this day. But I would say that this act of journaling was first born out of necessity. It started as a very creative response to an often lonely or puzzling childhood. So you see, my parents were in their mid-30s when they had me, and their parents were in their mid-30s when they had them, and their parents were also in their 30s. So my great-grandparents, which is really not that far back, maybe some of you have great-grandparents in your own lives, mine were born in the 1880s. They held a lot of influence in our household over the generations. Those ghosts, so to speak, were influencing the foods we ate and the manners of the table, all kind of back to their generation. And I used to hear all the time, you'll know what we mean someday. You'll know what we're talking about when you're older. Or just wait until you have kids and then you'll see what I mean. Or even lately, I heard, just wait until you're my age and then you'll understand. And so there was this trace of this kind of British Victorian era going on there where children were seen and not heard. Some rather strict rules of engagement. And there were very strict rules, some spoken, some not, about how a girl was supposed to behave, who she was supposed to become. And it was the same for my brothers. They suffered as well, and my aunts and my uncles. And while my brothers were outdoors catching crawdads in the creek and running amok in the neighborhood, I spent a great deal of time upstairs in my bedroom playing with the dollhouse, and a good afternoon was spent climbing the trees in the backyard, far above it, far above everyone. And then later years were spent at the neighborhood chlorinated swimming pool right around the corner. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even stepped into fresh water until I moved here to Michigan, which was when I was 30. So as a counselor, I hear how these narrative threads wind through families, and as parents, we tend to repeat what we know, both consciously and unconsciously. But there's a great limitation in the logic of just wait until later. You know, first of all, it assumes that there's no way to resolve your desires and your wishes until a future date, one that is potentially many years out into the making. It also assumes you're lacking in the insight, the maturity, the understanding required for such complex knowledge, or so it seemed to them. And because NO was the most frequent response to just about any normal developmental request I had that required leaving the house, I learned something of a future orientation, a sense that someday, somewhere, life was going to start to happen. And surely you've heard this theme before. There are a lot of famous songs about life over the rainbow and such, and so many dreamers and artists and writers are born from these kinds of experiences. So as a young person, I learned to preserve the now for a future date, when I could make better sense of it, to unpack it, to take it out, to read it, and someday, aha, now I get it. Now I know what they were talking about. And now I can make sense of things a little better than before when it was so close in front of me. And as an adult, I've learned that journaling takes me further than my own myopic view. We get short-sighted sometimes. So I can hold it at an arm's length, maybe weeks, maybe days, and even years later. So patterns begin to emerge, not unlike the view from a cockpit, where streams become rivers and roads lead to highways, and a life begins to reveal itself with greater clarity and understanding. So, in sum, journaling can provide perspective. Now, the other thing is that, like many of you, I was the last of my siblings to leave the nest, and I had their addresses where they took off to. And my best playmate and friend, Barb, who moved 500 miles away, and I'm still in touch with her. We're Facebook friends, actually. I have a box of letters from her over the years, and sometimes letters were sent, and sometimes they're not, depending on whether or not I could find a stamp, probably. But journaling and letter writing was a way to stay connected, because remember, in the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s and even into the 90s, there was no social media, there was no email, and long-distance calls were very, very expensive. You just didn't do it unless it was an emergency or a birthday or a holiday. So in my hand, I brought with me a small notebook. And I want to share some of this with you because it's been important enough for me to keep this small notebook. And it's really in pretty good shape. I've kept it in the top left-hand drawer of whatever dresser I've possessed over the past 38 years. And it sounds a bit bizarre, that I would hang on to something that closely for this long. But this rather bland 9.5 by 6-inch, slightly yellowed subject notebook has been sharing company with my socks and my scarves and my pajamas all these years in the bottom of the drawer, along with a few other important items to me. A tiny Bible that my Aunt Lucille had given to me to give to my firstborn's future bride, which I got to do just a few months ago. And my baby girl, who is now in her 30s, her first music box, and a love letter from my husband, Bill, who you'll hear a little bit about in a moment, whom I met shortly before I purchased this journal for my first year English comp class. And I'm not going to read the love letter. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. But on the cover it reads Cardiff, and that was my family's name. Stacey, journal, in case I didn't know what it was. $1.10, English 101, Professor Lucas. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 to 12:30, 1080 Wesco Hall. And I made notes right on the front about the final and where that was going to happen, and it was being held on a Saturday. Can't figure that out. It says to me to bring my theme paper, 2 pens, and a dictionary, and an essay called The Corruption of Sports, which I actually found and looked at. I couldn't remember it for the life of me now. And the appeals to your grade were good until 5 p.m. on May 19th. So that process was in place at that time. So well, apparently some things haven't changed. I mean, English 101 is still a requirement at just about any college and university across the decades. And you too have your journal requirements, perhaps some prompted with a theme or an epigraph, or maybe it's all free writing like my journal apparently was. But what I think is rather amusing is that I did discover that I had numbered each entry very carefully, keeping track of the assignment requirement. And knowing probably at that time in my life, I probably blew it off for days on end while I was too busy in my big life there at the campus on that one hill in that flary flat landscape that is Kansas. I was in the University of Kansas at the time. And I would sit and I would write in the Union cafeteria or in the basement of the Wesco Hall, which was the home of the humanities department. Unfortunately, it was the ugliest building at that time that existed in an otherwise beautiful campus, limestone buildings and red tile roofs and very Gothic and beautiful. And I would sit and I would write and quickly catch up. And I noticed that some of the writing is black and some of the writing is blue and some is in pencil, and I probably was trying to make it look like I had done it over time. I wish I'd taken it a little bit more seriously, and I encourage you to do that. You too maybe recognize your own catching up as I did, but I do wish I'd written more authentically, because as I learned much later, do it, take the time, and do it for yourself, not just for the requirements. So a little bit of background. I graduated from high school in 1977, and what was it like back then? So a few weeks before I left, the big news was that the king had passed away. Elvis Presley had died. And granted, he was a bit before my time. He was more my sister's time. But nonetheless, we knew it was the end of an era. And disco was still popular, and the mainstream music was, in my opinion, not so great at the time. I probably enjoy it more now with nostalgia than I did back then. I kind of thought I was a little too cool for the pop culture of my peers. But there was some form of a campus mainframe. No PCs. As a matter of fact, the Apple II series was launched in April of 1977, and that wasn't anything I heard about at the time. And I had no idea why would anybody want to own a computer. It just didn't make sense. I didn't even bring a typewriter to campus with me, and I should have brought my typewriter to show you what a typewriter is, but in the first year of college, that really wasn't unusual. It was pretty bare bones. You brought your college ruled paper, you brought your number 2 pencils, you had big gummy erasers and big pens, and there wasn't a lot more than that. And you know, school was so much cheaper. I found my tuition bill, and my first semester I took 16 credits, and it was $325 at the university. And my books were a stack of maybe this high. It was about $100. So on my 18th birthday, NASA, the space program, launched the Voyager 2 on its journey toward interstellar space, and it's still going out there. It's still traveling on and on. And I read where it's being tracked by some unit called the Deep Space Network, and it listens for space noise and other signs of intelligent life out there. And I find this to be very fascinating stuff. And I've read that it's continuing on infinity in case something blocks it or runs into it or blows it up, I guess. But it's still tracking through this network, and I feel like I have a commonality there. I'm moving forward and launching forward all the time as well. And there I went up to the road to the university very ill-equipped to deal with such an adjustment to life on the outside. And who was I now? I wasn't the athlete. I wasn't the sports editor of the school newspaper. I wasn't my brother's little sister. I wasn't anyone of the Cardiff family. No one knew me. I was just me on this big campus, and I was looking for a way to belong. So while I put off the English 101 class, I had heard things. I was intimidated. I had heard it was the weed out class, that a campus legend. It seems to persist to this day to some degree, but I learned it's really not true. And on January 31st in 1978, this was the second semester, my 18-year-old self wrote, "Today I finally went to English after getting things straight with my previous instructor. He requested that each student sign a contract that stated these conflicts for me. Number 1, you may not dispute any grade he gives you, not even ask, because he is more experienced and he knows his stuff. And number 2, if you can't answer a question in class, he will ask you to leave and be counted absent for that day. You may only have 3 absences before you must drop." So those were the 2 that upset me. I can't believe someone like that would actually be able to call himself a teacher. I was so uncomfortable in that class, it would have been virtually impossible for me to be creative. The first day we discussed straight grammar, terms I'd never even heard of. He said they were key behind good writing and must be applied and known. I feel creativeness and expressiveness are the keys to success. I don't mean you don't need grammar, but I feel that by the age of 18, you would have developed a more natural ability toward punctuation and syntax. And then he read one of his favorite compositions. It was morbid. It reminded me of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, but on a much gorier level. And the way he read it, too, he had wild eyes and a raised voice, and it was more than I could take. And my class was in the military science building with its bare walls and boarded up windows. Getting something out of English means too much for me. I must feel more relaxed so I can write. I've never been in a classroom situation such as that. I felt so nervous. And at the bottom, in a notation from my professor, who was Jane Lucas, wrote, "Well, welcome to my world." So there was some relief there. And I've considered many, many career paths, as you all are doing now, and I help students decide on their careers. My first was as a counselor, which I am now, but I also thought about being a phys ed teacher. I thought about coaching. I thought about being a journalist, but I don't remember this thought at all. On February 15th, I wrote, "One of my favorite pastimes is listening to my stereo. That is something I really miss about being home. My brother Sandy, who is also a musician, has a great set and an extensive album collection, and I can pass the hours by just sitting down with my headphones and going through about 5 albums. It's a great way to relax and let my mind wander. If there was anything in life I could do for a career, I'd be a recording engineer. That would be the ultimate dream." I have no memory of that, but it's in my journal. Now, on the 16th, my husband now of 36 years, we were dating at the time, and he had called me. It says, "Bill called me this morning with nervous jitters for his logic test. I've passed over that road myself during my related philosophy class last semester. I never could understand Plato and Spinoza and Kierkegaard and the like. I'm really glad that class is behind me now. I can't say I'm more enlightened about the meaning of life either. And later that week, just some journal musings. Riding the bus is a drag. I always take the 10:50 bus to English, but I never seem to make it on time. Either it's 2 minutes late or a half hour early. In hindsight, I must not have known how to read the bus schedule. But I almost didn't make it this morning, and I think my alarm rang intermittently for about a half hour. Thank God my roommate had already left. And I wrote about food. And Easter Sunday, my grandma can't make it for Easter brunch today because she went into the hospital. But Aunt Lucille, Aunt Frances, Sharon, and Bill were there for Mom's cooking. We had creamed eggs on toast, grits and gravy, chicken livers, bratwurst, and homemade puff pastries. It was great. And later, I wrote, now that I've been gone away to college, it seems Dad is all the more anxious to see me these days. I went up to the office Saturday when I got home, and I sat in the waiting room, and I finally went back to see him. He kind of slipped out of his professional personality for a moment, and he gave me a big hug and a kiss. I'll never forget it. And for this set of entries, I got an A++, outstanding, so it was encouraging. But I think I got a C in the class. But I'm happy I had that last entry, because my dad's been gone for well over half my life. And these are the memories and the moments that are precious to capture. Well, I ended up leaving school. Shortly after the semester, a lot of things fell apart. My parents' world collapsed due to their separation and then major health issues. And I learned more about the grown-up world that they inhabited than I'd ever bargained for. Bill and I left Kansas altogether, and we went to Texas for the next 8 years. And it's there where we started a family, and I wrote letters to my young children for their 18th birthday. And I wrote more letters to family who were spread out across the country, and more journals. And we'd grown weary of life in the Dallas suburbs, and 2 job layoffs and another relocation, and here we are, we landed in West Michigan in Grand Rapids, sight unseen. And it was over cartons of Chinese chicken and egg rolls one night when I announced I was ready to go back to college. And I knew what I wanted to study this time. I knew that I was certain I was going to finish this degree. So on June 10th, in 1990, I wrote in my journal, I'm in school, 2 weeks left of Introduction to Psychology, and I have an A so far, 100 on my second test. Not only had I carried a fear of failure, but the anxiety of the classroom came right back. And this time I am succeeding. I finally discovered my passion, and I'm determined I'm going to become a psychologist. This is so totally different. I'm so focused this time around. I truly feel there is nothing to get in my way this time. And I've discovered I'm absorbing the material. It's a whole new level of discipline for me. I have so much energy. And I find I'm happiest when I'm in class or when I'm studying in solitude, and I'm never bored with it. It feels so natural. Before now, school seemed so impossible. To have that degree and to feel a sense of completion is really all that matters to me now. I've carried the shame of quitting and feeling like a failure for way too long, and it's time to move on. And it's important now that it's all mine and no one else's. I'm paying for it. I even completed all the paperwork on my own. And I want to give my kids a sense of confidence. I want them to see that I can do this and that they will too. And it's true, I did finish my degree at Grand Valley State, and I did get my graduate degree as well, and it was in counseling. I changed from psychologist to counselor. But I can say it really was the best thing that I ever did for myself, and I encourage you all to keep going and do the same for you. So now I say journaling as therapy, and what that means is that journaling is introspective. It involves writing down your internal thoughts, your wishes, your desires, your fears, your phobias, your anxieties, your joys, your longings. It's an accounting of history that can be very therapeutic, and it can be a healing process. The journal itself can be a place you can go to when you're in need of a good friend. In the long term, when you read back over the years, as I've done, and as I said earlier, it leads to self-understanding. It's a real healing process. you can remind yourself of just how young you once were, that you are now. Far younger than my own kids that I have. They're in their 30s, and I can myself see them as I could see myself as I would see them. So it leads to a lot of self-compassion, gives perspective, forgiveness, acceptance, and recognizing for the most part that we all do the best we can do with what we've got in the moment. Therapy is the kind that you receive by actual appointment, that is. It involves observation by another. It's a relationship that requires at a minimum two persons, one a professional who's trained in such observations and interpretations. But therapy and journaling combined with one another can really enhance the process. We all suffer to some degree or another, despite how confident we may appear at any time across a lifespan. And I, for one, can certainly attest to that fact. So earlier in my intro, I referenced historians, and what is this? What am I talking about? Well, I do want you to consider this digital age that we live in. You know, a few weeks ago, Bill upgraded his BlackBerry, and yes, he still was using that platform, to an iPhone, and he lost all of his text messages and many of his photos when they transferred his data. You've all probably had that happen. Poof, in an instant, it's gone. I've written on my laptop, and once I crashed the laptop, and I lost 2 years of my own journaling. And I know that since I've had a cell phone, I've become a very lazy photographer. My iPhone serves more as a camera than my actual phone, and I have thousands of captured moments. Some are kind of silly, you know, plates of food and photos of my dog sleeping and eating and walking and begging for more food, and images of car parts and things that I don't even own anymore. But when you were paying for film development and you were taking your little cartridge to the photomat, you were really thinking about what you were about to spend, and your memories that you chose to cherish were a little more selective. And yes, I have a lot of photos in the last year or so on my iPhone that are really precious to me, and my son's wedding, my daughter's moving day, birthdays, celebrations, but literally thousands and thousands of digital images at this point. And what becomes of this excess of riches that we're collecting? What happens when the technology that supports these images grows extinct? Just a few months back, the last VCR left the production line in Japan, and I'm looking at a box of fading videotapes in my basement, and I'm wondering what's going to happen to all this stuff? What becomes of these memories I've attempted to preserve? And all this history of mine? Yet in my hallway, hanging on the wall, there are framed photos from the 1890s. My father when he was a toddler with his dog Punch, and my husband Bill's grandmother in her domestic science class in 1912. And I have boxes of letters written when my father-in-law was serving in World War II in the Marine Corps. And I even have our family Bible that was handed down from the 1800s. And they're all fading, and they're preserved because I can hold them in my hands as I'm holding this little journal right now. So I'm asking you to take care and preserve your memories. I suggest that you two start with a notebook, a spiral, whatever works best for you, and practice your cursive, or at a minimum, print copies right on your laptop and print it and put it in a box. If you're stuck with where you are to start writing, there are so many examples. I went out and I did a little search, and I found a very comprehensive list of 500 prompts on the New York Times for narrative and personal writing. And they're categorized in everything from childhood memories to college to work to careers and beyond. It's easy to find prompts. You probably get them in your classes. But go outdoors, take a pen, take your journal, write down everything you observe. The many textures of the architecture in the buildings downtown, the changing colors of the leaves, and the landscape, and clips of passing conversations. Just pick up a pen and write about this truly amazing time in your life. Because someday you may be invited to sit behind a table on a stage, share your stories with college students. You don't know where you're going. It could happen. And you could be sitting with your kids or your neighbor's kids or your nieces, your nephews, talking to a child, reading a story about a day that at a time in your life seems so incredibly insignificant and mundane. But it was a moment in your life that you cared to write about. And so, as I shared, I've kept this book in a very safe and secure little place. Well, who cares? Why bother? Well, it's obvious to me now. And I just want to say thank you for letting me read and letting me share some of my journal and a little bit about a sweet spot in this one counselor's life. So now go forth and write. That's it.